Hello everyone, I'm Mr. Furlong, and today we're talking about the female reproductive system. In the last video, we looked at the male reproductive system. In this video, we'll be taking a look at the female reproductive system. As we go through this video, I would like you to take special note of the similarities between male and female reproductive systems. We might think that they're very different from one another, but really they are very similar to one another. For many of the structures found in the male, we find the same in the female. And of course, that only makes sense because in an embryo, they all developed from the same sets of cells. The main function of the female reproductive system is to produce the egg cells. Those are the gametes. Remember, the male is to produce the sperm cells. Those are the male gametes. The main organ are the ovaries. Now, the ovaries produce the egg cells, and of course remember the testes produced the sperm cells. The ovaries and the testes came from the same sets of cells back during fetal development. In fact, when a fetal male is developing, the testes are up in the abdomen and eventually they descend out of the abdomen. There are some differences, of course. The egg cells are produced prior to the woman being born. Unlike in males, where they don't start producing the gametes until puberty, the females already have their eggs present. They are in sort of a suspended animation. If you recall from your biology class, the gametes are made during the process of meiosis, and all the egg cells are stopped during metaphase 1, in that first part of meiosis, and they won't finish meiosis until fertilization has taken place. So when we talk about the egg cells are found in a structure called a follicle. And these follicles will mature at puberty instead of the egg cells. And the egg cells will finish their meiosis if they've been fertilized. So go ahead and take a few minutes and you want to label all of the highlighted structures on your diagram. So let's start with the internal accessory organs, starting with the fallopian tubes. So here we can see the fallopian tube as it is sort of surrounding the ovary, and the fallopian tube is lined with cilia. So when the eggs are released, they will be moving along the fallopian tube with the help of the cilia. So in males, we call this tube the vas deferens. If fertilization takes place, it has to take place in the fallopian tube. It's going to take roughly a week for an egg to travel from the fallopian tube into the uterus, and the eggs are only viable for 24 hours. So all fertilization takes place in the fallopian tube. Sometimes the egg implants itself in the fallopian tube and you have what's called an ectopic pregnancy, in which case the fallopian tube has to be removed. Otherwise, not only will the baby die, but the mother can die as well. The next structure is the uterus, and there we can see this is a muscular organ about the size of a fist normally. It's shaped like a pear, and this will be where the embryo, if an egg has been fertilized, will implant, and it will sustain the life during the development. So for the 9 months, the uterus has the ability to stretch and get larger and larger and larger to accommodate the growing baby. The top part of the uterus is known as the body. The opening into the uterus is known as the cervix. The next structure is an opening from the outside the body to the cervix called the vagina, and this is also known as the birth canal. This is another view of the female reproductive system. Again, pause the video and label those highlighted structures. So in this diagram, we do see an oocyte, that's the actual name for an egg cell, and it will enter into the fallopian tube. The end of the fallopian tube has these finger-like projections called the infundibulum, and that will kind of help bring the egg cell into the fallopian tube. Sometimes it doesn't, it falls out and goes into the abdomen and it dies. But as it goes into the fallopian tube, this is about where, if a pregnancy is going to occur, if there's fertilization, this is where the sperm would be to fertilize that egg. As it moves through the fallopian tube, it takes about a week, it should implant itself somewhere in the body of the uterus. Sometimes it does happen closer to the cervix, in which case Might be a little bit higher risk pregnancy, but certainly nothing that doctors can't handle. For the external structures, there are 4 parts that make up the vulva, and those are the labia majora, which is the outer covering that helps to protect the internal organs. There's the labia minora, and this is also a protective covering just underneath the labia majora. There is the clitoris, which contains multiple nerve endings. The clitoris is made up of the same tissue as the penis. In fact, during development, this tissue will, depending on the hormones, will either develop into a clitoris or develop into a penis. And then there is the vestibule. This contains the vestibular glands that also secrete a fluid. The vestibular glands are similar to the Cowper's gland in the male, because they have the same function. They secrete mucus during times of sexual stimulation. So let's see how hormones play a role in all of this. What you're going to find is a lot of similarities between male and female hormones. So remember, this all starts in the hypothalamus, little part in the brain that is constantly monitoring all of these things. And again, at puberty, it is going to produce a hormone called gonadotropin releasing hormone, GnRH, sounds familiar, right? That goes to the pituitary gland at the base of the brain. When the pituitary gland receives the GnRH, it is going to release 2 hormones, FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, and LH, luteinizing hormone. Both of these go to the ovary, so again, a lot of similarities here. What LH will do is it produces the female hormones. Remember, in males it produces the male hormones. Here the female hormones are going to be the estrogen and progesterone. FSH is going to cause the eggs to mature, or specifically it's going to cause the follicles to mature. A better way of saying that. Hence the name follicle stimulating hormone. Remember, in males it calls for sperm production. Some of the actions of estrogen and progesterone are the secondary sex characteristics. It helps to widen the hips. It's going to begin the development of the breast tissue, and it also helps to conserve fat. Now, all of these things are designed to help have and nurture a baby. It takes a lot of energy, hence the fat deposits. It also, with the mammary glands, helps to produce the milk to be able to feed the baby, and the widening of the hips to allow for the baby's head to get through the pelvis. So there's quite a few hormones that are taking place. A lot of different things are happening in different organs during the menstrual cycle. This is the time when the uterine wall is getting ready to accept a zygote. A zygote is an embryo that is in those very early stages when it's just only a handful of cells. So let's take a look at these different stages. In this proliferative phase, I mean, it's really basically from about day 5 to roughly day 13. Right, so here we can see all these things that are happening during the proliferative phase. One is FSH and LH are being secreted. That is causing, in the ovary, follicles to mature. So they're going to go from what's known as a primordial follicle all the way up to a mature follicle. Notice what happens. The levels of estrogen goes up, the levels of progesterone goes up, and in the uterus, notice what's happening to the uterine wall. That is going to increase. This is a tissue that is developing for the implantation of a zygote. On the day of ovulation, which is is 1 day, usually right around day 14, the egg is released. So notice what happens. There's a spike in the FSH and LH, which causes the egg then to be released from the ovary. And on that day is the only day that it could become fertilized. So the sperm would have to fertilize the egg. Now remember from the last video, sperm can stay alive for up to 3 days in a female. So intercourse does not have to take place on the day of ovulation. It could take place within 3 days of ovulation. And the sperm could be in the fallopian tube waiting for an egg to be released. Notice though, in the uterus, the uterine wall, it's not quite fully developed yet, which is fine, because even if there is a pregnancy, it's going to take about 5 to 7 days before the egg even makes it to the uterus. And then it's going to take a couple more days before it actually implants itself on that lining that is being produced. So in the secretory phase, which is going to be from day 15 all the way through day 28, notice what's happening is that our LH and FH is dropping off from the pituitary gland. However, in the ovary, there is a structure called the corpus luteum that starts to produce LH. Now, this is going to continue the levels of estrogen and progesterone. Notice those levels are remaining high. That is going to continue to build that uterine lining. So one of two things are going to take place at this point. So let's start if there's a pregnancy. If the egg has been fertilized, the developing zygote is going to produce a hormone called HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin. That's the hormone that home pregnancy tests will test for because it's produced by the zygote, and it tells the corpus luteum, hey, there's a pregnancy, maintain yourself, keep producing luteinizing hormone, or the LH. I'll be in the uterus in a few days, and it will keep the lining ready for that zygote to then attach to and continue developing. The most common thing that happens, though, is that the egg is not fertilized, and so, which means that the corpus luteum breaks down into the corpus albicans. Now notice when that happens, when the corpus luteum breaks down, estrogen, progesterone levels decrease. When that happens, the uterine lining is going to be discharged in what is known as menstruation. And this takes several days to discharge all of that uterine lining, and then this whole process starts all over again. So that's just a real quick overview of the female reproductive system. In our next video, we're going to be taking a look at how a fetus develops.